For 18 years, Victoria Lawson had been invisible at Tidewater Engine Works. Just another grease-stained mechanic in coveralls fixing boat engines. But when two Navy SEALs walked into her Jacksonville shop carrying classified combat footage, her coworkers would discover that the quiet woman they'd dismissed and mocked was actually Viper, one of the military's most legendary explosive ordnance disposal specialists who had voluntarily vanished after a mission that still haunted. Special Operations Command, before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wrench slipped from Victoria Lawson's oil-stained fingers as laughter erupted from the break room across the shop floor. She wiped her hands on her navy blue coveralls and adjusted her safety glasses, trying to block out the sound of her younger coworkers sharing stories about their weekend fishing adventures. At 37, she had perfected the art of invisibility. At Tidewater Engine Works in Jacksonville, Florida. "There goes Quiet Vic again," she heard Derek Palmer whisper to his buddy Ryan Alvarez as they passed her workstation. 18 years here, and still acts like she's afraid of her own shadow. The nickname had stuck for nearly 2 decades now, ever since she'd started working at the marine repair facility, appearing silently each morning at 6 a.m. sharp, methodically, working through her assigned engines and disappearing before anyone could engage her in conversation. They thought she was just antisocial. They had no idea how terrifyingly accurate their assessment was about her ability to move unseen. What they didn't know was that Victoria carried a secret so explosive it could rewrite everything they thought they knew about courage under fire. Her official job description read, Senior Marine Engine Technician, specializing in diesel repair, hydraulic systems, and electrical troubleshooting, tasks that kept her close to the machines but invisible to the people. She preferred it that way. Some secrets were worth protecting with silence. The morning routine never changed. Arrive at 06:00 hours sharp, old habits died hard, check the overnight work orders, and begin her methodical rounds through the cavernous repair facility. The shop was her sanctuary, filled with the familiar symphony of air compressors, the metallic ping of cooling engines, and the sharp smell of diesel fuel and marine-grade oil. Here, among the massive Caterpillar and Cummins engines, she could almost forget who she used to be, almost. But every bolt she turned, every fuel injector she calibrated, every electrical system she diagnosed was a reminder of skills that once made her the most feared bomb disposal expert in the entire U.S. Navy, skills that had saved countless lives in places whose names were still classified. Skills that had cost her everything she'd ever cared about. Derek Palmer swaggered over to her workstation with his usual entourage of younger mechanics. At 30, Derek was everything Tidewater Engine Works wanted in a lead technician: confident, charismatic, and completely convinced of his own expertise. His work clothes were always suspiciously clean, and his hands showed none of the permanent staining that came from decades of real mechanical work. "Hey, Quiet Vic," Derek called out, his voice carrying across the shop floor with practiced authority. "Think you can handle that twin-screw rebuild, or should we let someone with actual horsepower experience take over?" His crew laughed on cue. Ryan Alvarez, barely 26 and fresh out of trade school, added with a smirk, "Yeah, we need someone who can actually lift the heavy parts, not just read about them in repair manuals." If only they knew that the woman they were mocking had once defused a 500-pound improvised explosive device while under sniper fire, her hands steady as surgeons' instruments as enemy bullets whined overhead. If only they knew she'd once carried a wounded teammate 3 miles through hostile territory after their convoy hit an IED. Victoria looked up from the fuel pump she was rebuilding, her dark brown hair pulled back in its usual tight ponytail. She could see the casual dismissal in their eyes, the automatic assumption that her quiet demeanor meant incompetence. She'd seen that same look in mirrors once, years ago, when she thought physical strength mattered more than mental precision. Just following the manufacturer's specifications, she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the shop's ambient noise. Her accent carried just a hint of her Tennessee childhood, softened by years of military discipline and civilian anonymity. Derek stepped closer, his confidence radiating like heat from an overworked engine. Vic, your job is to turn wrenches and change oil filters, not to overthink every repair like you're building a space shuttle. There's a difference between reading service manuals and actually understanding how these engines work under real conditions. Other mechanics nodded in agreement. They'd all heard the assumptions about female mechanics who'd supposedly never had what it took to handle the heavy-duty marine engines that powered commercial fishing boats and luxury yachts. In their minds, Victoria was just another cautious technician who'd never understood the art of marine engine repair. Victoria's hands stilled on the fuel pump housing. For a moment, she considered telling them about the time she'd rebuilt an entire electrical system on a disabled Navy patrol boat while explosions lit up the horizon around them. She thought about describing the sensation of working with live ordnance, where one wrong move meant death for herself and everyone depending on her expertise. Instead, she smiled softly, closed her repair manual, and returned to her work without a word. No reaction, no argument, just the quiet dignity of someone who had nothing to prove to anyone who mattered. But as Derek's crew moved on to their next target, Victoria's fingers unconsciously traced the small scar on her right palm. A reminder of the day shrapnel from a roadside bomb had torn through her protective gloves. And she'd still managed to complete the disposal procedure that saved an entire convoy. The young mechanics didn't. Notice Henry Hank Morrison watching from the parts counter near the shop's entrance. At 55, Hank had seen everything the marine repair industry had to offer, from genuine experts to dangerous pretenders. He'd been a Navy machinist mate for 12 years before transitioning to civilian work, and something about the way Victoria carried herself had always bothered him. Not bothered in a bad way, bothered like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit where everyone assumed it belonged. He'd been observing her for months, noting the way she moved around engines with the unconscious precision of someone who'd trusted their life to mechanical systems. Mechanics learned to respect the machinery, but they didn't inspect bolt patterns with the intensity of someone who knew that overlooked details could mean the difference between life and death. "You know what, Beth?" Hank said quietly to his assistant, Beth Crawford, who was organizing inventory nearby. "That woman knows more about precision work than she lets on." Beth glanced toward Victoria, who was now performing what appeared to be a routine inspection on a yacht's twin diesel setup. The inspection looked standard, but Beth noticed something unusual. Victoria's hands moved with a methodical pattern that seemed almost ritualistic, checking not just for obvious problems, but for stress indicators that most mechanics would never think to examine. "What makes you say that, Hank?" Beth asked, genuinely curious. She'd always wondered why Victoria seemed so different from the other long-term employees. "Watch her hands," Hank replied, keeping his voice low. "She's not just checking for mechanical wear. She's looking for signs of tampering, stress fractures that could indicate sabotage, electrical connections that don't match original specifications. That's not standard marine maintenance thinking. That's security thinking." Hank had no idea he was watching one of the most decorated explosive ordnance disposal specialists in Navy history. Someone whose classified missions had been studied in military academies around the world, whose techniques had become standard procedure for EOD teams from Baghdad to Kabul. As if sensing their attention, Victoria looked up and met Hank's eyes across the shop floor. For just a moment, he saw something flicker in her expression. A depth of knowledge and experience that seemed impossible for someone with her official employment history. Then it was gone, replaced by the familiar mask of professional competence and practiced invisibility. The rest of the day passed in routine maintenance tasks, but Hank couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Victoria Lawson than anyone realized. He'd seen enough classified personnel files during his Navy years to know that sometimes the most dangerous people were the ones who worked hardest to appear ordinary. That evening, as Victoria packed up her tools and prepared to leave for her small apartment near the naval base, she didn't notice Hank making a discreet phone call to someone in the base's personnel office. She was too busy trying not to think about the photograph hidden in her bedroom dresser. 5 sailors in dress blues standing proudly in front of an EOD vehicle, the explosive ordnance disposal badge gleaming on their uniforms. She was in the center of that photograph, the only woman, the youngest face wearing petty officer first-class chevrons. 4 of those sailors were dead now, victims of the war that never seemed to end. She was the only survivor of EOD Team 7, and the only one who remembered what it felt like to hold lives in her hands with nothing but skill, training, and steady nerves standing between success and catastrophe. But tomorrow would be another day of routine maintenance, another day of being invisible, another day of pretending that the most dangerous thing she'd ever done was rebuild a marine diesel engine. The young mechanics would continue their jokes, never knowing that the woman they called Quiet Vic had once been Viper, the EOD specialist who diffused more live ordnance than any other technician in her generation. Some secrets were worth keeping. Some legends were safer in the shadows. At least that's what she told herself every night when she lay awake, listening to the sound of military aircraft taking off from nearby Naval Air Station Jacksonville, remembering what it felt like to serve something greater than herself. The next morning brought the kind of challenge that separated real mechanics from pretenders. Carol Jensen, the shop owner, had received an emergency call at 5:30 a.m. from the captain of Sea Fortune, a 60-foot sport fishing charter that generated more revenue for Tidewater Engine Works than any other single client. The vessel's twin Caterpillar C-32 engines had suffered a catastrophic failure during an overnight trip, leaving 24 passengers stranded 15 miles offshore. "I need my best people on this," Carol announced as the morning shift gathered. Around the main work bay, the failed engines sat on massive hydraulic lifts, their covers removed to reveal the complex maze of fuel lines, electrical harnesses, and precision-machined components that made modern marine diesel so powerful and so temperamental when things went wrong. Derek Palmer immediately stepped forward, his chest puffed out with the confidence of someone who'd never met a problem he couldn't talk his way through. "Carol, you know Ryan and I have been specializing in the big cat engines. We can have this boat back on the water by tomorrow morning." Ryan Alvarez nodded eagerly, his trade school certification still fresh enough that he believed textbook knowledge could substitute for real-world experience. "We've got this covered. These C-32s are just scaled-up versions of the smaller engines we work on all the time." Victoria continued organizing her tool cart nearby, but her experienced eye had already diagnosed the problem. The failure pattern on both engines was identical: fuel injector seizure caused by contaminated diesel that had crystallized in the high-pressure fuel rails. It was a complex repair that required not just mechanical skill, but an understanding of how fuel contamination spread through interconnected systems. More importantly, she could see evidence that someone had attempted a field repair while the boat was still at sea. Scratches on bolt heads, misaligned electrical connections, and tool marks that suggested panic rather than precision. Whoever had tried to fix the engines had actually made the problem worse, potentially creating safety hazards that could cause fires or explosions. "Actually," Derek continued, warming to his theme, "this looks like a straightforward fuel system problem. Ryan and I can have the injectors pulled and cleaned in a couple hours, then run some system flushes to clear out any contamination. Simple routine maintenance, really." Hank Morrison frowned, studying the engines more carefully. His Navy experience had taught him to look beyond the obvious, and something about this failure bothered him. "Derek, have you checked the fuel quality reports from their last service?" These C-32s are sensitive to fuel contamination, and if someone used the wrong additives or got bad diesel, this could be more complicated than it looks. Derek waved off the concern with the casual dismissal of someone who'd never had to live with the consequences of his mistakes. "Hank, we've got this handled. Sometimes you old-timers overthink these repairs. Modern engines are pretty robust. They can handle a little contamination without any major problems." Victoria's hands tightened on her wrench. She'd seen modern engines that were pretty robust turned into twisted metal and fire after someone had underestimated fuel contamination. In her experience, the more complex the system, the more catastrophic the failure when something went wrong. "What about you, Quiet Vic?" Derek called out, his voice carrying just enough mockery to make sure everyone was listening. "Any brilliant insights from the manual you're always reading?" This was the moment Victoria had been dreading for 18 years, when her knowledge would expose her true background. She could see the fuel contamination pattern clearly, could identify the specific type of additive that had caused the crystallization, could predict exactly which components would need replacement and which could be salvaged. But explaining how she knew would raise questions she wasn't prepared to answer. "Fuel system problems can be tricky," she said carefully, her voice neutral and professional. "Might want to run a full contamination analysis before you start pulling injectors." Derek laughed loud enough to ensure his audience could hear. "See what I mean? Always overcomplicating things. Vic, this isn't rocket science, it's basic marine maintenance. Sometimes you just need to get your hands dirty and fix the problem instead of analyzing it to death." Ryan stepped up beside his mentor, emboldened by Derek's confidence. "Maybe you should stick to the smaller engines. Vic, these big commercial diesels require someone who understands real power systems, not just the little outboards you're used to working on." The comment hung in the air like diesel exhaust. Victoria felt every eye in the shop focused on her, waiting to see how she'd respond to the direct challenge to her competence. She could hear the whispered conversations starting, the subtle shift in atmosphere that happened when professional disagreement became personal. But what Derek and Ryan didn't know was that they were challenging someone who had once rebuilt an entire fuel injection system on a Navy patrol boat while under enemy fire, working by flashlight in a flooded engine room with bullets cracking overhead. Someone who understood fuel chemistry well enough to identify explosives by their chemical signatures. "I'll just focus on my assigned work," Victoria replied, which was technically true. But her assigned work had once included ensuring that fuel systems couldn't be used to create improvised explosive devices. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Derek turned back to the engines with renewed confidence, convinced he'd just established the pecking order in front of everyone who mattered. "All right, Ryan, let's show them how real mechanics handle a challenge. We'll have these engines purring like kittens by closing time." As Derek and Ryan began their work, Victoria noticed something that made her blood run cold. In their eagerness to impress, they were ignoring basic safety protocols. No fuel system pressure relief, no proper ventilation setup, no fire suppression. Equipment staged nearby. They were treating contaminated fuel like harmless motor oil, not recognizing that crystallized additives could create static electricity buildup that could ignite fuel vapors. She watched Derek remove the first fuel injector without properly bleeding the high-pressure lines. Diesel fuel sprayed across his work area under pressure that could inject fuel directly into skin, causing severe chemical burns. Ryan was using an electric impact wrench near fuel vapors without checking for spark-proof rating, thought this was exactly the kind of situation that had haunted Victoria's nightmares for 18 years, watching people create dangerous conditions through ignorance and overconfidence, knowing that her intervention would expose her background, but knowing that her silence could cost lives. Hank Morrison was watching too, and Victoria could see the concern growing in his experienced eyes. He understood enough about fuel systems to recognize that Derek and Ryan were creating a potentially lethal situation, but he lacked the authority to stop them without concrete evidence of immediate danger. "Victoria," Hank said quietly, approaching her workstation. "I don't like what I'm seeing over there. Those boys are playing with fire, literally." Victoria looked up from the small outboard engine she was pretending to service, her eyes meeting Hank's across the shop floor. For just a moment, she saw recognition there, not of who she was, but of what she represented: experience, knowledge, the kind of hard-won expertise that came from situations where mistakes killed people. "Sometimes," Victoria said carefully, "the best way to help is to be ready when things go wrong." She began quietly gathering fire suppression equipment, emergency medical supplies, and fuel spill containment materials. Not enough to be obvious, but enough to be prepared when Derek and Ryan's overconfidence inevitably collided with reality. As the morning progressed, Victoria watched the disaster developing with the grim certainty of someone who'd seen it before. Derek and Ryan were making every mistake she'd expected, their enthusiasm blinding them to the growing risks of their improvised repair procedures. But what worried her most wasn't the immediate danger. It was the growing realization that her 18 years of hiding were about to come to an end. Because when the situation reached the critical point she knew was coming, she would have to choose between maintaining her cover and preventing a catastrophe. And Victoria Viper Lawson had never been able to watch people die when she had the skills to save them. The explosion of fuel vapor that Victoria had been dreading came at 11:47 a.m., just as Derek Palmer was attempting to remove the final fuel injector from the starboard engine. The flash was brief but terrifying, a blue-orange fireball that singed his eyebrows and sent both him and Ryan scrambling backward, their faces pale with sudden understanding of how close they'd come to serious injury. "Jesus Christ!" Derek shouted, his hands shaking as he dropped his tools. "What the hell just happened?" But Victoria was already moving, her response so fast and precise that it seemed almost choreographed. She appeared at the engine bay with a CO2 fire extinguisher before the fuel vapors had fully dissipated, quickly blanketing the work area with suppressant foam. Her movements were economical, professional, and completely automatic, the muscle memory of someone who'd dealt with far more dangerous situations than a small fuel flash. "Shut off the main electrical breakers," she called to Hank, her voice calm and authoritative in a way that made everyone in the shop stop and listen. "Ryan, get the emergency ventilation fans running. Derek, step back and let that area cool before you touch anything else." The transformation in her demeanor was subtle but unmistakable. Gone was the quiet, deferential mechanic who'd spent 18 years blending into the background. In her place stood someone who clearly understood emergency procedures with the kind of precision that only came from life-or-death training. Hank Morrison watched this display with growing fascination. He'd seen plenty of mechanics deal with shop accidents over the years, but Victoria's response was different. She didn't just react to the emergency, she controlled it, managed it, neutralized it with the kind of systematic approach that spoke to specialized training. "Nice work, Vic," Hank said as the immediate danger passed. "Where'd you learn emergency response procedures like that?" Victoria's face immediately returned to its usual neutral expression, but Hank caught the momentary hesitation in her eyes. "Previous job had some safety training," she said simply, already moving to clean up the suppression foam. But Hank had been in the Navy long enough to recognize military bearing when he saw it. The way Victoria had assessed the situation, prioritized actions, and maintained calm under pressure, that wasn't civilian safety training. That was combat-level crisis management. As Derek and Ryan sheepishly returned to their work with considerably more caution, Hank found himself studying Victoria with new interest. He began noticing details he'd overlooked before, the way she unconsciously checked exits when entering a room, How she positioned herself with clear sightlines to potential threats, the fact that her tool organization followed a pattern that looked suspiciously like military loadout procedures. "Beth," Hank said quietly to his assistant during their lunch break, "I want you to run a background check on Victoria Lawson. Standard employment verification, but dig a little deeper into her work history." Beth Crawford looked up from her sandwich, surprised by the request. "Is there a problem with her work? She's been here longer than almost anyone." "No problem with her work," Hank replied, watching Victoria through the break room window as she methodically cleaned her tools. "But I'm starting to think there's more to her story than what's in her personnel file." Beth followed his gaze. Victoria was eating lunch alone, as always, but something about her posture suggested constant alertness rather than antisocial behavior. She sat facing the entrance, back to the wall, with clear views of all approaches, positioning that looked casual, but was actually tactically sound. "You think she's hiding something?" Beth asked. "I think she's hiding everything," Hank replied. "Question is whether it's something we need to worry about or something we need to understand." That afternoon, Beth's preliminary research confirmed Hank's suspicions. Victoria's employment history before Tidewater Engine Works was surprisingly sparse. She'd listed previous experience at Gulf Coast Marine Services in Mobile, Alabama, but when Beth called to verify employment, the company had no record of anyone named Victoria Lawson ever working there. Her references checked out, but they were all civilian contacts with no direct knowledge of her technical training. Her certifications were legitimate but recent, obtained just before she'd started at Tidewater, as if she'd needed to quickly establish civilian credentials. Most intriguingly, her Social Security number showed an 18-year gap in employment history from ages 19 to 37, with no tax records, no previous addresses, no credit history. It was as if Victoria Lawson had simply appeared fully formed 18 years ago, with perfect mechanical skills and no traceable past. "Hank," Beth said, printing out her research results, "this is really weird. It's like she didn't exist before she started working here." Hank studied the documents, his Navy experience helping him recognize patterns that civilian employers might miss. Or like someone created a new identity for her 18 years ago. "Beth, can you check military databases? See if there's any record of someone with her physical description who might have transitioned out of service around that time." "Isn't that illegal? Looking into someone's military service without their permission?" "Not if we're investigating potential security issues," Hank replied, though he wasn't entirely certain of the legal boundaries. "And given what happened today, I think we need to understand exactly who we're dealing with." As if summoned by their conversation, Victoria appeared in the break room doorway. "Hank, I wanted to check on Derek and Ryan. Make sure they're following proper safety protocols for the rest of that fuel system work." Her tone was professional, but Hank noticed that her eyes had already cataloged everyone in the room, identified potential exits, and assessed the general mood of the conversation. Again, not civilian behavior. "They're being a lot more careful after this morning's excitement," Hank replied. "Thanks to your quick thinking, nobody got seriously hurt." Victoria nodded, but something in her expression suggested she was measuring his words for hidden meanings. "Just glad everyone's safe. Fuel systems can be unpredictable, especially when you don't understand what you're dealing with," Hank said, watching her reaction carefully. "Good thing we had someone around who knew how to handle hazardous materials properly." The phrase hazardous materials caused a barely perceptible tightening around Victoria's eyes. In civilian contexts, it was just a safety term. In military contexts, it often referred to explosives, chemical weapons, or other specialized ordnance. "Like I said, previous job had some safety training," Victoria repeated, but her voice carried a slight edge that suggested the conversation was approaching boundaries she wasn't comfortable crossing. After she left, Beth leaned closer to Hank. Did you see how she reacted when you mentioned hazardous materials? It was like you'd said something significant. Yeah, I saw it. Hank was already reaching for his phone. Beth, I'm going to make some calls to contacts I still have at the base. Unofficial inquiries, just to see if anyone recognizes her description or has heard rumors about someone matching her profile. What if she really is hiding something dangerous? What if she's running from something serious? Hank looked out at the shop floor, where Victoria had returned to her quiet, methodical work routine. But now he could see the constant alertness. Beneath the calm exterior, the way she unconsciously positioned herself for rapid response to unexpected threats. Then we need to know what we're dealing with, he said. Because someone with her skills, working under a false identity, either represents a security risk we need to address or an asset we don't fully understand. What Hank didn't know was that his phone calls to Naval Air Station Jacksonville would trigger automated security alerts in databases he didn't even know existed. Databases that tracked inquiries about personnel, whose service records were classified at levels requiring special compartmented information clearance. By 5 p.m. that day, Victoria's 18 years of anonymity had approximately 72 hours left before her carefully constructed civilian identity began to unravel completely. And somewhere in the Pentagon, computers were already flagging an unusual pattern of inquiries about a former EOD specialist whose classified service record contained information that could potentially compromise ongoing special operations around the world. 3 days after the fuel vapor incident, Tidewater Engine Works faced its most challenging repair in decades. The Atlantic Duchess, a 180-foot luxury yacht owned by a prominent defense contractor, had limped into Jacksonville with what the captain described as impossible engine problems that 3 different repair facilities couldn't solve. The yacht's twin MTU 16 volts 4000 engines, each worth more than most people's houses, were exhibiting a failure pattern that defied conventional diagnostic procedures. They would run perfectly for exactly 17 minutes, then simultaneously shut down with identical error codes that didn't match any known malfunction in the service manuals. Carol Jensen was practically vibrating with anxiety as she briefed the morning shift. This client represents potentially $2 million in annual revenue for us. The owner flies in tomorrow morning, and he expects his yacht operational by noon. If we can't fix this, he's pulling all his fleet maintenance contracts and going to Miami. Derek Palmer stepped forward with characteristic confidence, though Victoria noticed his bravado had been somewhat tempered since the fuel incident. Carol, Ryan, and I have been researching MTU systems all week. We think it's probably a software glitch in the engine management computers. Should be able to reset the parameters and get them running normally. Ryan nodded eagerly, tablet in hand, displaying technical specifications he'd downloaded from manufacturer websites. These MTU engines use integrated control modules that sometimes get corrupted data. We can reload the factory settings and run calibration procedures. Victoria continued, organizing her diagnostic equipment, but her experienced eye had already identified something the others had missed. The failure pattern wasn't random, it was precisely timed, which suggested either sophisticated sabotage or a cascading system failure that triggered secondary shutdowns to prevent catastrophic damage. More importantly, she'd noticed something during her preliminary inspection that made her blood run cold. Microscopic metal filings in the engine oil that exhibited magnetic properties inconsistent with normal wear patterns. In her former life, such filings had been early indicators of improvised explosive devices designed to destroy engines from the inside. Carol turned to address the entire team. I've also called in Randy Morrison from Advanced Marine Electronics. He should be here this afternoon to help with the computer diagnostics. Hank Morrison looked up sharply. Randy's my nephew. He's good with electronics, but Carol, these MTU Engines are more complex than anything he's worked on before. I know, Carol replied, but we need every expert we can get. This repair could make or break our reputation with high-end clients. As the team gathered around the massive engines, Victoria found herself facing the same dilemma that had haunted her for 18 years. She could see the real problem clearly. Someone had introduced metallic particles into the lubrication system that were creating electromagnetic interference with the engine control modules. It was sophisticated sabotage designed to look like mechanical failure, and it was exactly the kind of threat she'd been trained to identify and neutralize. But explaining how she knew would require revealing knowledge that civilian mechanics weren't supposed to possess. Knowledge about how enemies used innocent-looking mechanical failures to mask attacks on critical infrastructure. Derek and Ryan began their diagnostic procedures with the methodical approach of technicians following manufacturer protocols. They connected computer interfaces, ran system scans, and checked error logs with the kind of thoroughness that impressed observers, but missed the real problem entirely. Systems show normal parameters across all sensors, Derek announced after 2 hours of testing. Oil pressure good, fuel flow optimal, electrical systems checking green. This has to be a software issue. Randy Morrison arrived that afternoon, a 28-year-old electronics specialist with impressive credentials, but no experience with the kind of sophisticated threat Victoria had identified. He immediately began interfacing with the engine management computers, running diagnostic routines that would have been adequate for normal mechanical problems. "I'm seeing some unusual electromagnetic signatures," Randy reported, studying his oscilloscope readings. "But they don't match any known interference patterns in my database." Victoria watched from across the shop, knowing exactly what those signatures meant. The metallic particles weren't just creating interference. They were designed to accumulate in specific engine components until they reached critical mass, at which point they would cause catastrophic mechanical failure that could kill everyone aboard the yacht. This wasn't accidental sabotage. This was a targeted attack on a defense contractor, using his luxury yacht as the delivery mechanism. And if she was right about the timing pattern, the engines would suffer complete failure during the owner's planned voyage tomorrow, far enough from shore that rescue would be impossible. "Hank," Victoria said quietly, approaching the senior foreman, "I need to show you something, but it needs to be private." Hank followed her to a quiet corner of the shop, noting the unusual tension in Victoria's normally calm demeanor. "What's on your mind, Vic?" Victoria pulled out a small sample of the contaminated engine oil, the metallic particles clearly visible under the shop's fluorescent lighting. "This isn't normal wear debris. These particles are ferromagnetic and precisely sized. Someone introduced them deliberately." Hank examined the sample, his Navy experience helping him recognize that Victoria was describing something far more serious than mechanical sabotage. "Are you saying this is some kind of attack?" "I'm saying this yacht belongs to a defense contractor, and someone has sabotaged his engines in a way that will cause catastrophic failure during normal operation." "The 17-minute cycle?" "That's a timer, Hank. Someone wants this boat to fail when it's too far from help." The implications hit Hank like a physical blow. If Victoria was right, they weren't dealing with a difficult repair. They were looking at an attempted assassination disguised as mechanical failure. "How do you know all this?" Hank asked, studying Victoria's face carefully. "This isn't the kind of analysis a marine mechanic would normally make." Victoria met his eyes, and for the first time in 18 years, she let him see past the carefully maintained facade. "Because I've seen this before, Hank. I've seen what happens when enemies use mechanical systems as weapons." The admission hung between them like a live wire. Hank realized he was finally seeing the real Victoria Lawson, not the quiet mechanic who'd hidden in their shop for 18 years, but someone with knowledge and experience that came from places civilian technicians never went. "What do we do?" he asked. Victoria looked back toward the yacht, where Derek, Ryan, and Randy continued their conventional diagnostic procedures, completely unaware they were dealing with a potential terrorist attack. We fix it quietly, and we don't tell anyone. How we knew what to look for. And if Carol asks how we solved an impossible problem. Victoria picked up her specialized tools, equipment she'd never used at Tidewater before, but had kept maintained and ready for 18 years, we tell. Her we got lucky. But as she approached the engines, Victoria knew that luck had nothing to do with what was about to happen. She was about to use skills that could only have come from one source, the kind of specialized training that the U.S. Navy provided to explosive ordnance disposal specialists who dealt with enemies that turned everyday machinery into weapons of war. And once she demonstrated those skills, her 18 years of anonymity would be over forever. Victoria worked through the night, alone in the shop with the sabotaged yacht engines, using tools that officially didn't exist in Tidewater's inventory: precision electromagnetic scanners, chemical analysis equipment, and specialized extraction devices she'd kept hidden in her personal toolkit. She systematically removed every contaminated component and neutralized the threat. The work was painstaking and dangerous. Each metallic particle had to be extracted without triggering the electromagnetic cascade that would destroy the engines. It was exactly the kind of meticulous, life-or-death precision work that had made her legendary in EOD circles, but she hadn't performed it in 18 years. By 6 a.m., she'd eliminated the threat and replaced the compromised components with clean parts, carefully disposing of the contaminated materials using protocols that would prevent any forensic analysis. To casual observation, it would appear that she'd simply performed an unusually thorough engine overhaul. When Carol Jensen arrived that morning to check on the repair progress, she found Victoria calmly running final diagnostic tests on engines that now showed perfect operational parameters. "Vic, how did you ... Carol stared at the computer readouts in amazement. Derek and Ryan worked on this for 2 days and couldn't even identify the problem. Randy spent 6 hours with his diagnostic equipment and came up empty. What did you find?" Victoria kept her expression neutral, though internally she was calculating how much truth she could reveal without exposing her background. Contaminated lubrication system. Sometimes particles get introduced during fuel servicing that don't show up on standard tests. Had to do a complete system flush and replace some internal components. But the electromagnetic interference Randy detected, the 17-minute failure cycle, resolved when I cleaned the contamination out of the control module housings. The particles were creating static buildup that interfered with computer signals. All technically true, though Victoria omitted the part about the contamination being deliberately introduced by someone with advanced knowledge of maritime sabotage techniques. Carol shook her head in wonder. "Vic, this is incredible work. The owner's going to be here in 3 hours, and you've solved a problem that stumped our best people." But as Carol walked away, Victoria noticed Hank Morrison watching from the parts counter with an expression that mixed admiration with deep suspicion. He'd arrived early and had been observing her work for the past hour, noting the specialized tools she'd used and the systematic approach that went far beyond normal marine maintenance procedures. "Impressive work," Hank said quietly as he approached her workstation. "Especially considering you did it with equipment I don't remember ordering for the shop." Victoria felt her stomach tighten. In her focus on neutralizing the threat, she'd been careless about concealing her specialized tools. "Some personal equipment I've collected over the years. Sometimes the standard tools aren't precise enough for complex problems." Hank picked up one of the electromagnetic scanners she'd used, studying its military specification markings. "Personal equipment, right, Vic. This device costs more than most mechanics make in a year, and it's designed for detecting explosive ordnance signatures." The admission hit Victoria like cold water. She'd been so focused on preventing a potential assassination that she'd forgotten to maintain her cover story. I bought it surplus from a military contractor, sometimes useful for finding electrical problems. But Hank's expression made it clear he wasn't buying the explanation. Victoria, I've been making some calls about you. Unofficial inquiries through old Navy contacts. Victoria's heart rate spiked, though she kept her face carefully neutral. Oh? Funny thing happened when I started asking around. Seems like inquiries about you trigger some interesting responses from base security. Nothing official, mind you, but the kind of responses that suggest someone's very interested in knowing who's asking questions about Victoria Lawson. Before Victoria could respond, Beth Crawford approached with a manila folder and an expression of barely contained excitement. Hank, you need to see this. I finally got through to someone at the Veterans Administration who was willing to check disability records. Victoria felt the walls closing in around her. 18 years of careful anonymity were unraveling in real time, and there was nothing she could do to stop it without revealing even more about her background. What did you find? Hank asked, though his eyes never left Victoria's face. Beth opened the folder with theatrical flourish. Victoria Lawson receives a 100% disability rating from the VA for service-connected PTSD. But here's the interesting part. Her DD to 214 discharge papers are classified above my clearance level. I couldn't even confirm what branch of service she was in. That's pretty unusual, Hank said, his voice carefully neutral. Most discharge documents are standard personnel records. What kind of service generates classified paperwork? Victoria knew exactly what kind of service generated classified discharge documents, the kind that involved operations whose existence couldn't be officially acknowledged, missions that were studied in war colleges but never discussed in public, achievements that were honored in classified ceremonies that families never attended. There could be lots of reasons for classified records, Victoria said, but she could hear the defensiveness creeping into her voice. Could be, Hank agreed. But combined with your unusual skill set, your specialized equipment, and the way base security responds to inquiries about you, well, it paints an interesting picture. Beth pulled out another document. There's more. I managed to trace backwards through some medical records. Had to call in favors from friends who work in military hospitals. Victoria Lawson was treated for severe injuries at Walter Reed Army Medical Center 8 years ago. Burns, shrapnel wounds, and psychological trauma consistent with explosive blast exposure. The medical records hit Victoria harder than she'd expected. She remembered that hospital stay, weeks of skin grafts, months of physical therapy, and daily sessions with psychiatrists who tried to help her process the guilt of being the only survivor of EOD Team 7. That's private medical information, she said quietly, but without the force of real protest. Part of her was almost relieved that the truth was finally coming out. Hank sat down across from her, his expression shifting from suspicion to something approaching understanding. Victoria, I don't know what kind of service you performed for this country, but I can see it cost you everything. The question is whether you're running from something dangerous or hiding from something painful. Victoria looked around the shop. That had been her refuge for 18 years. In a few hours, the yacht owner would arrive and praise the miraculous repair that had saved his life, without ever knowing his yacht had been targeted for sabotage. Derek and Ryan would take credit for solving an impossible problem, and she would return to her quiet anonymity, fixing routine problems and pretending she'd never been someone who stood between innocent people and those who wanted them dead. Except now, Hank and Beth knew she was hiding something significant. And if they'd been able to uncover this much information through unofficial channels, it was only a matter of time before someone with official authority started asking the same questions. I'm not dangerous to anyone here, Victoria said finally. I just want to be left alone to do my job. I believe you, Hank replied. But Victoria, secrets this big don't stay buried forever. Especially when you're too good at your job to stay invisible. What none of them knew was that Victoria's use of specialized EOD equipment the night before had triggered automated alerts and systems designed to track the deployment of sensitive technologies. By noon that day, her location would be flagged in databases monitored by agencies, whose job was to ensure that classified capabilities didn't fall into the wrong hands. The clock was ticking, and Victoria Viper Lawson's 18 years of hiding were about to come to an abrupt end. The black Suburban pulled into Tidewater Engine Works parking lot at precisely 13:47 hours, military time that Victoria recognized even as she tried to convince herself it was coincidence. She was calibrating a fuel injection system on a small sport fisher when she noticed the vehicle through the shop's bay doors, her trained eye immediately cataloging details that civilian mechanics would miss: government plates, tinted windows rated for ballistic protection, 2 occupants in the front seats maintaining visual surveillance of all approaches. The vehicle's positioning allowed for rapid egress while blocking potential escape routes from the shop. Victoria's hands stilled on her diagnostic equipment. After 18 years of anonymity, she recognized the signs of an official visit that had nothing to do with engine repairs. Expecting any inspections today? She asked Hank Morrison, who was reviewing work orders at the parts counter. Hank looked up, following her gaze to the Suburban. Not that I know of. Carol didn't mention anything about government contracts or regulatory visits. But Victoria could see 2 men in civilian clothes approaching the shop entrance, their bearing and movement patterns immediately identifying them as military personnel despite their casual attire. They moved with the unconscious coordination of people accustomed to operating in hostile environments, their eyes constantly scanning for threats that civilian visitors would never consider. The taller man was in his early 40s, with the kind of weathered face that came from years of outdoor operations in harsh climates. His companion was younger, perhaps 35, with the compact build and alert demeanor of someone trained for direct action missions. Both wore clothing that appeared casual, but was actually designed to conceal weapons and tactical equipment. Afternoon, the older man said as they entered the shop. I'm looking for Victoria Lawson. We understand she works here. Carol Jensen emerged from her office, immediately shifting into customer service mode. Can I help you, gentlemen? Are you here about a repair estimate? Actually, we need to speak with Ms. Lawson privately. Official business. The man's tone was polite, but carried the kind of authority that discouraged questions. Victoria felt her 18 years of carefully constructed normalcy crumbling around her. She could continue working and pretend she hadn't heard, could slip out the back entrance and disappear into the maze of marine supply warehouses that surrounded the facility. But running would only confirm their suspicions and potentially endanger her coworkers. I'm Victoria Lawson, she said, setting down her tools and walking toward the 2 men. What can I do for you? The older man extended his hand in a gesture that appeared friendly, but allowed him to assess her reaction time and physical conditioning. Commander Luke Brennan, Naval Special Warfare Command. This is Chief Petty Officer Sam Riley. We'd like to speak with you privately, if possible. Navy SEALs. Victoria had worked with their predecessors during her EOD career, had provided explosive ordnance support for special operations missions that never appeared in official records. Their presence confirmed her worst fears. Someone had connected her civilian identity with her classified military service. What's this about? Carol Jensen interjected, her protective instincts overriding her natural deference to authority. Victoria's been a model employee for 18 years. If there's some kind of problem, I think I should know about it. Commander. Brennan's expression remained professionally neutral. Ma'am, this involves matters related to national security. I'm afraid we can't discuss details with unauthorized personnel. Victoria could see the confusion and concern spreading across her coworkers' faces. Derek Palmer and Ryan Alvarez had stopped their work to watch the proceedings, while Hank Morrison studied the two visitors with the sharp attention of someone who recognized professional military operators. "There's a conference room in the back," Victoria said quietly. "We can talk privately there." But as they walked through the shop, Victoria noticed Chief Riley's eyes cataloging the specialized equipment she'd inadvertently left visible after the yacht repair. His gaze lingered on the electromagnetic scanner, the chemical analysis kit, and other tools that no civilian mechanic should possess. The conference room was small and cluttered with parts catalogs and maintenance schedules, but it provided the privacy the SEALs had requested. Commander Brennan closed the door and activated a small electronic device that Victoria recognized as a portable signal jammer, standard equipment for sensitive conversations in unsecured locations. "Ms. Lawson," Brennan began, "or should I say Petty Officer First Class Victoria Lawson, formerly of EOD Team 7? The use of her former rank hit Victoria like a physical blow. For 18 years, no one had addressed her by her military title, and hearing it now brought back memories she'd spent nearly 2 decades trying to suppress. "That person doesn't exist anymore," Victoria said quietly. "I'm just a Marine mechanic." Now, Chief Riley opened a tablet and displayed what Victoria immediately recognized as classified mission footage. "Ma'am, with respect, that person very much still exists, and we need her help." The footage showed a desert landscape that Victoria remembered with painful clarity, the compound where EOD Team 7 had conducted their final mission, where 4 of her teammates had died in an explosion that should have killed her too. But this wasn't archival footage from 18 years ago. This was recorded 3 weeks ago, Commander Brennan explained. Same location, same type of facility. But now it's being used by a terrorist organization that's acquired advanced explosive devices. Devices that match the signature of ordnance you encountered during your final mission. Victoria stared at the screen, her mind automatically analyzing the tactical situation despite her emotional turmoil. She could see the defensive positions, the likely locations of buried explosives, the patterns that indicated sophisticated bomb-making capabilities. "The technology you helped capture 18 years ago has been reverse-engineered," Riley continued. "We're facing IEDs that our current EOD teams can't safely neutralize. The blast patterns, the trigger mechanisms, the countermeasures, they're all based on designs you encountered before." "You want me to come out of retirement," Victoria said, though it wasn't really a question. "We want you to help us save lives," Brennan replied. "Our intelligence indicates that this terrorist cell is planning attacks on American soil using the same advanced explosives. You're the only person still alive who successfully dealt with this technology." Victoria looked at the footage, seeing not just a tactical problem, but the faces of her dead teammates. Diana Martinez, who died covering Victoria's retreat. Robert Kim, killed while trying to defuse a secondary device. Sarah Thompson and Mike Foster, lost when their approach route was compromised by hidden explosives. "I can't," she said finally. "I'm not that person anymore. I haven't touched military ordnance in 18 years. Commander Brennan leaned forward, his expression both understanding and urgent. "Victoria, we've been monitoring your activities. For the past week, the yacht repair you completed yesterday? That wasn't routine maintenance. That was sophisticated sabotage designed to cause catastrophic failure during normal operation." Victoria's heart stopped. They knew about the sabotage. "You identified and neutralized a terrorist attack using skills that officially don't exist," Riley added. "Ma'am, you never stopped being an EOD specialist. You just started working in a different environment." The two SEALs let that sink in before Brennan continued. "The question isn't whether you're still capable. The question is whether you're willing to use those capabilities to prevent attacks that could kill hundreds of innocent people." Victoria stared at the classified footage, knowing that her answer would determine not just her future, but potentially the lives of countless people she'd never meet. Her 18 years of hiding were over. The only question now was whether she'd emerge from the shadows as Victoria Lawson, civilian mechanic, or as Viper, the EOD specialist who'd never lost a teammate until her final mission. Outside the conference room, she could hear the normal sounds of the shop continuing, engines being diagnosed, parts being ordered, routine repairs being completed by people who had no idea their quiet coworker was being asked to return to a war that had never really ended. Commander Brennan swiped to the next video file on his tablet, and Victoria's breath caught in her throat. The footage showed a convoy of armored vehicles moving through a desert landscape that looked eerily familiar, the same terrain where EOD Team 7 had conducted their final mission 18 years ago. This was recorded by a surveillance drone last month, Brennan explained, his voice taking on the clinical tone of a military briefing. The convoy belongs to a joint task force investigating reports of advanced IED activity in the region. Victoria watched the screen with growing dread as the lead vehicle approached what appeared to be an abandoned checkpoint. Her trained eye immediately identified the tactical errors: insufficient spacing between vehicles, predictable route selection, inadequate reconnaissance of potential ambush sites. "Watch the explosion signature," Chief Riley said quietly. "Tell us what you see." The IED detonated with a distinctive blast pattern that Victoria recognized immediately. The explosion created a shaped charge effect that penetrated the vehicle's armor at precisely calculated angles, followed by secondary detonations that suggested sophisticated multi-stage ordnance. "That's a Mark 7 enhanced penetrator," Victoria said automatically, her analytical mind overriding her emotional reluctance. "Dual-stage detonation with armor-piercing primary and fragmentation secondary. The blast timing indicates remote detonation with electronic countermeasures to prevent jamming." Both SEALs stared at her with expressions of grim satisfaction. "Ma'am, our current EOD team spent 3 weeks analyzing that footage and couldn't provide that level of detail," Brennan said. "You identified the device type and operational characteristics in 30 seconds. Victoria felt the familiar weight of technical knowledge she'd tried to forget for 18 years. The Mark 7 series was experimental ordnance. We only encountered it during classified operations. How did terrorists acquire that technology?" Riley swiped to another video file, this one showing the aftermath of the convoy attack. Victoria could see EOD personnel in protective suits attempting to examine the blast crater, their movements cautious and uncertain. 3 American EOD specialists were killed trying to neutralize secondary devices at this site, Brennan explained. They were using standard procedures that proved inadequate against advanced ordnance. The terrorists have weaponized technology that our current training programs don't address. The next video showed what appeared to be a terrorist training facility, with individuals practicing the construction and deployment of sophisticated explosive devices. Victoria's stomach clenched as she recognized the assembly techniques, methods she'd learned to identify and counter during her classified missions. "Intelligence indicates this cell has acquired detailed technical specifications for Mark 7 devices," Riley continued. "They're mass-producing modified versions for deployment against civilian targets on American soil." Victoria stared at the screen, seeing not just tactical intelligence, but the faces of the 3 dead EOD specialists who died trying to do her former job. "When intelligence suggests coordinated attacks are planned for major metropolitan areas within the next 30 days, Brennan replied. "Shopping centers, sports stadiums, transportation hubs, anywhere they can maximize civilian casualties." Riley switched to a map display showing potential target locations across the United States. Red dots marked cities from New York to Los Angeles, each representing thousands of potential victims who had no idea they were being targeted by enemies, using weapons most Americans didn't know existed. Our current EOD teams are trained on conventional ordnance, Brennan explained. They're excellent at what they do, but they've never encountered the kind of advanced devices you specialized in neutralizing. We need someone who understands both the technology and the mindset of enemies who use civilian infrastructure as weapons. Victoria closed her eyes, trying to block out the memories that the footage had triggered. She could see her teammates' faces, Diana Martinez laughing at a joke during their final briefing, Robert Kim studying technical manuals late into the night, Sarah Thompson and Mike Foster arguing about the best approach for clearing a suspected IED field. "Ma'am," Riley said quietly, "we know what happened to EOD Team 7. We know why you left active duty. But the skills you learned during those missions, skills that cost your teammates their lives, those skills could save hundreds of civilians who don't have any other protection." Brennan leaned forward, his expression both respectful and urgent. "Victoria, we're not asking you to return to combat operations. We're asking you to train the next generation of EOD specialists so they don't walk into the same trap that killed your team." The room fell silent except for the distant sounds of the repair shop continuing its normal operations. Victoria could hear Derek Palmer and Ryan Alvarez discussing a fuel injection problem, their voices carrying the casual confidence of people who'd never had to make life or death decisions based on incomplete information. "The yacht you repaired yesterday," Brennan continued, "that sabotage used a scaled-down version of the same technology. Someone wanted to test their capabilities against a high-value target before moving to larger operations." Victoria's head snapped up. "The defense contractor who owns that yacht, he was the target?" "Preliminary investigation suggests the sabotage was designed to eliminate him during his planned voyage to a maritime defense conference," Riley confirmed. "Your intervention prevented what could have been the opening move in a larger campaign." Victoria thought about the metallic particles she'd extracted from the yacht's engines, the sophisticated timing mechanisms, the careful planning that had gone into creating a weapon that would appear to be mechanical failure. It was exactly the kind of attack she'd been trained to identify and prevent. "If I agree to help," she said carefully, "what exactly are you asking me to do?" Brennan exchanged glances with Riley before responding. "Initially, consultation on current threat assessment and EOD training protocols. Help us understand what we're facing and how to counter it. Eventually, possibly direct involvement in neutralizing the terrorist cell before they can execute their planned attacks. Direct involvement meaning what?" "Meaning we might need you to do what you've always done," Riley said. "Stand between innocent people and those who want them dead." Victoria stared at the tablet screen, which now displayed a photograph of the 5 members of EOD Team 7 in their dress uniforms. She was in the center, younger and more confident, surrounded by teammates who trusted her judgment and followed her into situations that had ultimately killed them. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Ma'am, with respect, time is the one thing we don't have," Brennan replied. "Intelligence suggests the attacks could begin within days. We need your expertise now, before more people die because we don't understand what we're fighting." Victoria looked at the faces of her dead teammates, then at the map showing potential target cities filled with innocent people who had no idea they were in danger. For 18 years she'd hidden from the responsibility of her knowledge and experience. But the war had found her anyway, disguised as routine maintenance work on a sabotaged yacht. The question wasn't whether she was still capable. The yacht repair had proven she'd never really stopped being an EOD specialist. The question was whether she was willing to risk everything to prevent attacks that could make September 11th look like a preliminary test. Outside the conference room, her coworkers continued their normal routines, unaware that their quiet colleague was being asked to emerge from 18 years of hiding to fight enemies they didn't know existed. The combat footage had shown her the stakes. Now she had to decide whether Victoria Lawson, civilian mechanic, was ready to become Viper again. The conference room door opened with a soft click, and Victoria emerged, followed by Commander Brennan and Chief Riley. The normal sounds of the repair shop seemed muted now, as if the weight of the conversation had somehow altered the acoustic. Properties of the familiar space. Every eye in Tidewater Engine Works was focused on the small group as they walked across the shop floor. Derek Palmer and Ryan Alvarez had abandoned their workstation to get a better view, while Carol Jensen hovered near her office doorway, her face a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Ms. Lawson," Commander Brennan said, his voice carrying clearly across the shop, "we appreciate your time. We'll be in touch about the consultation work we discussed." Victoria nodded, but Hank Morrison stepped forward before the SEALs could leave. His weathered face showed the kind of determination that came from years of military service and an unwillingness to accept incomplete explanations. "Commander," Hank said, using Brennan's rank with the casual familiarity of someone who'd served, "I'm former Navy myself, 20 years, machinist mate, and I've never seen special warfare personnel make consultation visits to civilian repair shops." Brennan paused, studying Hank with the assessing gaze of someone evaluating potential security risks. "Mr. Morrison, some matters involve information that can't be discussed with unauthorized personnel." "Then maybe you should authorize me," Hank replied, "because I've been watching Victoria Lawson for months, and I've got questions that need answers. Questions about specialized equipment, classified discharge papers, and skills that don't match her official job description." Victoria felt the familiar sensation of walls closing in around carefully constructed lies. For 18 years, she'd managed to deflect curiosity and avoid detailed scrutiny. But Hank's investigation, combined with the SEAL's visit, had created a perfect storm that made continued deception impossible. Beth Crawford joined the group, carrying the manila folder that contained her research into Victoria's background. "I've been doing some digging too," she said, her voice trembling slightly with nervous excitement. "Victoria Lawson has a classified service record, receives 100% disability for combat-related PTSD, and was treated for blast injuries. At Walter Reed, that's not the profile of a typical marine mechanic." Derek Palmer laughed, though the sound carried an edge of uncertainty. "Come on, you guys are making this sound like some kind of spy movie. Vic's just a mechanic who's good with tools. She's been fixing engines here for 18 years. But Carol Jensen was studying Victoria's face with the sharp attention of someone who'd built a successful business by reading people accurately. "Victoria, is there something you need to tell us?" The moment stretched like a taut cable, filled with 18 years of carefully maintained silence and the growing pressure of truth demanding acknowledgement. Victoria looked around the shop that had been her refuge, at the coworkers who'd become the closest thing to family she'd allowed herself since losing her military teammates. Chief Riley stepped forward, his expression suggesting he'd reached some kind of decision. "Ma'am, with your permission, I think these people deserve to know who they've been working alongside." Victoria met his eyes and saw something she hadn't expected: respect for her choice to remain hidden, combined with understanding that continued secrecy was no longer possible or fair to people who'd trusted her for nearly 2 decades. "Go ahead," she said quietly. Riley turned to address the assembled group, his voice taking on the formal tone of an official briefing. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've been working with Petty Officer First Class Victoria Lawson, formerly of Explosive Ordnance Disposal Team 7, Naval Special Warfare Command." The shop fell completely silent. Even the ambient noise of air compressors and diagnostic equipment seemed muted in the face of this revelation. During her 8 years of active duty, Riley continued, Petty Officer Lawson completed over 200 EOD missions in hostile territories. She specialized in advanced explosive devices, chemical weapons disposal, and counter-terrorism operations. Her unit citation list includes the Navy Cross, 3 Bronze Stars, and the EOD Memorial Foundation's highest honor for valor under fire. Palmer's face had gone pale. "You're saying Vic is some kind of war hero?" "I'm saying Victoria Lawson is one of the most decorated explosive ordnance disposal specialists in Navy history," Brennan replied. "Her classified missions included operations that are still studied in military academies around the world." Victoria watched her coworkers' expressions shift from confusion to amazement to something approaching awe. These were people who'd known her as quiet, competent, and utterly unremarkable. The revelation that she'd lived an entirely different life before arriving at Tidewater was clearly difficult to process. "The yacht repair she completed yesterday," Riley continued, "involved neutralizing sophisticated sabotage that our initial investigation suggests was designed to cause catastrophic failure during normal operation. Ms. Lawson identified and eliminated a potential terrorist attack using skills she acquired during classified military service." Carol Jensen sat down heavily on a nearby work stool. "You're telling me that when Victoria fixed that yacht, she wasn't just solving a mechanical problem? She was preventing an assassination?" "That's exactly what we're telling you," Brennan confirmed. "The repair techniques she used, the equipment she employed, the systematic approach she took, that wasn't civilian maintenance work. That was military-grade explosive ordnance disposal." Hank Morrison nodded slowly, pieces of an 18-year puzzle finally clicking into place. "That's why she moves like she's always watching for threats. Why she positions herself with clear sight lines and multiple exits. Why she understands mechanical systems at a level that goes beyond normal training. But why hide it?" Beth asked, her voice full of confusion. "Why pretend to be just a regular mechanic when you're actually this incredibly accomplished person?" Victoria spoke for the first time since the revelations began, her voice quiet but clear. "Because EOD Team 7's final mission resulted in the deaths of 4 of my teammates. Diana Martinez, Robert Kim, Sarah Thompson, and Mike Foster. They died because I made a tactical error that led them into an ambush." The shop remained silent as Victoria continued. "I requested transfer to non-combat duties and had my service record classified because I couldn't handle the responsibility of leading people into situations where my mistakes could get them killed. I've been hiding here for 18 years because it felt safer than risking other people's lives." Ryan Alvarez, who'd been silent throughout the revelations, finally spoke up. "But you saved people yesterday. And probably other times we don't even know about." "That's different," Victoria replied. "That was just me, working alone, using skills I couldn't forget even when I wanted to." Commander Brennan stepped forward. "Victoria, what you're describing isn't cowardice. It's survivor's guilt combined with an overdeveloped sense of responsibility. Your teammates died because war is dangerous, not because you made mistakes." Derek Palmer, who'd spent years dismissing Victoria's capabilities, looked stunned. "All those times I made jokes about you not understanding real mechanical work. And you were actually this incredibly qualified person who could have shown us things we never imagined." Victoria managed a small smile. "Derek, you're a good mechanic. You just approach problems differently than someone who's had to worry about booby traps and enemy action." The weight of 18 years of deception was finally lifting from Victoria's shoulders, but it was being replaced by the heavier burden of renewed responsibility. Her co-workers now knew who she really was, which meant her period of anonymous service was over. The question now was whether she was ready to be Viper again, not just for herself, but for the people who'd just learned they'd been working alongside a legend they'd never known existed. That evening, Victoria sat alone in her small apartment, staring at the photograph she'd kept hidden for 18 years. 5 sailors in dress blues, standing proudly beside their EOD vehicle, the bomb disposal badge gleaming on their uniforms. Diana Martinez had her arm around Victoria's shoulder, both of them grinning with the confidence of people who believed their skills made them invincible. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Commander Brennan. Decision needed by 0800 tomorrow. Transport to Norfolk standing by, Norfolk Naval Station. Victoria knew that's where they'd want a briefer on the full scope of the terrorist threat, where she'd meet the current generation of EOD specialists who needed training on advanced ordnance they'd never encountered. Young sailors who reminded her of her former teammates, eager, capable, and potentially walking into the same kind of trap that had killed EOD Team 7. Another message arrived. This one from Carol Jensen. Take all the time you need. Your job will be here when you get back. We're proud of you. Then Derek Palmer. Sorry for all the jokes over the years. Never knew I was working next to a genuine hero. Ryan Alvarez. Would be honored to learn real mechanical skills from someone with your background. Hank Morrison. Sometimes the best way to serve is to step back into the light when people need you most. Victoria set the phone aside and walked to her kitchen window, which offered a view of Naval Air Station Jacksonville in the distance. She could see aircraft lights moving against the darkness, military planes conducting training missions, preparing for operations that might involve the same enemies who were planning attacks on American soil. For 18 years, she'd convinced herself that hiding was the right choice, that her guilt over her teammates' deaths made her unsuitable for positions of responsibility, that the world was safer when Victoria Viper Lawson remained buried beneath the identity of a civilian mechanic. But the yacht repair had proven that her skills were as sharp as ever. More importantly, it had shown her that threats didn't disappear just because she chose not to engage with them. The same technology that had killed her teammates was being weaponized against innocent civilians who had no protection except the current generation of EOD specialists who lacked the experience to recognize and counter advanced threats. Her laptop chimed with an encrypted email from an address she didn't recognize. When she opened it, she found a video message from someone she hadn't seen in 18 years. Victoria, this is Captain Sarah Chun, formerly Lieutenant Chun from EOD Team 4. I heard through channels that you might be coming back to active consultation. Victoria stared at the screen. Sarah Chun had been a junior officer when Victoria was at the height of her career, someone who'd looked up to the legendary Viper and had requested cross-training with EOD Team 7. I'm commanding the Navy's advanced EOD training program now, Chun continued. We've got 24 specialists ready for deployment, but they're facing threats that are beyond current training protocols. Victoria, these kids are good, but they don't have the institutional knowledge that died with your teammates. The video showed scenes from the current training facility, young sailors practicing with conventional ordnance, studying textbook procedures, learning from instructors who'd never encountered the kind of sophisticated devices that terrorists were now deploying. I know why you left, Chun said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who understood the cost of military service. I know about the guilt, the nightmares, the feeling that your mistakes cost lives. But Victoria, your teammates didn't die because you failed them. They died because they were willing to follow the best EOD specialist the Navy ever produced into situations that needed someone with your capabilities. Victoria paused the video, seeing her own reflection superimposed over Chun's image. 18 years older, marked by civilian life but still carrying the knowledge and instincts that had made her legendary in military circles. The question isn't whether you're responsible for their deaths, Chun continued as Victoria resumed the video. The question is whether you're willing to use what their sacrifice taught you to save the next generation of specialists who are walking into the same dangers. The video ended with an image that took Victoria's breath away, a memorial wall at the EOD training facility, showing photographs of specialists killed in action over the past 2 decades. Diana Martinez, Robert Kim, Sarah Thompson, and Mike Foster were there, along with dozens of other faces representing the human cost of fighting enemies who used explosives as weapons of terror. But below their photographs was something Victoria hadn't expected. her own military portrait, with a placard reading, Petty Officer First Class Victoria Viper Lawson, missing in action. Last known assignment, classified. They'd listed her as missing in action because her voluntary disappearance from military service had been so complete that the Navy couldn't officially acknowledge her retirement. For 18 years, she'd been carried on classified rosters as a missing asset whose status couldn't be confirmed or denied. Victoria closed the laptop and returned to the photograph of EOD Team 7. For the first time in 18 years, she could look at her teammates' faces without feeling overwhelming guilt. Instead, she felt something she'd forgotten was possible, a sense of purpose that went beyond personal comfort and safety. Her phone rang. Commander Brennan's number. "Commander, this is Victoria Lawson. Ms. Lawson, have you reached a decision?" Victoria looked one more time at the photograph, seeing not just the faces of dead teammates, but the legacy of knowledge and experience they died to protect. Knowledge that could save lives if she was willing to step back into the world she'd hidden from for 18 years. "Commander, I accept the consultation assignment, but I have conditions." "Name them." "I train the current EOD specialists according to my methods, not textbook procedures. I have full authority over training protocols and mission preparation. And if we identify the terrorist cell planning these attacks, I go in personally to neutralize the threat." There was a pause before Brennan responded. "Victoria, you've been out of active service for 18 years. Direct action missions require current qualifications and team integration." "Commander, I just neutralized a sophisticated sabotage operation using 18-year-old skills. My qualifications are current where it matters, in my ability to stay alive and complete the mission. As for team integration, I work better alone." Another pause. "Understood. Transport will be at your location at 0600 hours. Welcome back to active duty, Viper." Victoria hung up the phone and began packing. For the first time in 18 years, she wasn't packing civilian clothes and personal effects. She was preparing for deployment, gathering the specialized equipment she'd maintained in secret, loading the gear that transformed her from Victoria Lawson, civilian mechanic, into Viper, the EOD specialist who'd volunteered to stand between innocent people and those who wanted them dead. The 18 years of hiding were over. The war that had never really ended was calling her back. And this time, she wasn't going to let anyone else die because enemies thought mechanical systems could be turned into weapons without consequences. Outside her window, military aircraft continued their training flights, preparing for missions they didn't know might soon involve the most decorated EOD specialist in Navy history, someone who'd disappeared into civilian life, but had never really stopped being a warrior. 6 months later, Victoria stood in the advanced EOD training facility at Norfolk Naval Station, watching 24 young specialists practice the techniques she'd developed during her classified missions 18 years earlier. The trainees moved with the precise coordination of people who understood that mistakes in their profession measured consequences in lives rather than repair costs. "Chief Petty Officer Martinez," Victoria called to a young woman whose last name carried painful resonance. "What's your assessment of the device configuration?" Petty Officer Second Class Elena Martinez, no relation to Victoria's fallen teammate, but carrying the same determined expression, studied the training ordnance with the systematic approach Victoria had taught her. "Ma'am, dual-stage detonation with electronic countermeasures. Primary charge designed for armor penetration, secondary for personnel elimination. Approach vector should be from the northeast to minimize blast exposure." "Correct. But what's the most important factor in your survival?" "Assuming the enemy is smarter than I am," Martinez replied without hesitation. "If this device is here, there are probably 2 more I haven't found yet." Victoria nodded approvingly. The principle of tactical humility had been the hardest lesson. For her to learn, and the most important one for her to teach. Her original teammates had died because they'd trusted their expertise too completely, believing that skill and experience could substitute for careful paranoia. Captain Sarah Chun approached from the observation deck, carrying a classified folder that Victoria recognized as mission orders. "Viper, we've got confirmation on the terrorist cell location. Intelligence indicates they're preparing for final deployment phase." Victoria looked once more at her trainees, seeing in their faces the same eager confidence she'd carried into her final mission with EOD, Team 7. But these specialists had advantages her original team had lacked: knowledge of enemy tactics, understanding of advanced countermeasures, and most importantly, healthy respect for threats that could kill them faster than their training could save them. "Martinez, your team leader for the final exercise," Victoria announced. "Chun, Rodriguez, Thompson, you're with her. Remember everything we've practiced about assuming the worst-case scenario." As the trainees moved into position, Victoria followed Captain Chun to the briefing room where Commander Brennan and Chief Riley were waiting with detailed intelligence on the terrorist cell that had been planning attacks on American soil. The facility is located in the same compound where EOD Team 7 conducted their final mission, Brennan reported, spreading satellite photographs across the briefing table. But intelligence indicates the terrorists have made significant modifications to the defensive systems. Victoria studied the images, her mind automatically cataloging changes from the layout she remembered. Additional buildings, new approach routes, and most concerning, what appeared to be multiple redundant explosive installations designed to create cascading failures if triggered incorrectly. "They're expecting us," she said quietly. "This isn't just a terrorist training facility. It's a trap designed specifically for EOD specialists using the same tactics that killed my original team." Chief Riley pointed to several locations on the photographs. "Our analysis suggests they've weaponized the compound itself. Any conventional approach will likely trigger defensive systems that could eliminate an entire assault team." "Which is exactly what they're counting on," Victoria replied. "They want to create another EOD Team 7 disaster, but this time with contemporary specialists whose deaths would compromise current counter-terrorism capabilities." Captain Chun leaned forward. "Victoria, our standard protocols call for team-based approaches with full support elements. But given the specific threat configuration..." "You want me to go in alone," Victoria finished. "Same as 18 years ago, but this time without teammates to put at risk." The room fell silent as the implications settled over the assembled officers. They were asking Victoria to return to the same location where her military career had ended in tragedy, to face enemies who'd specifically prepared for her methods, using skills she'd spent 18 years trying to forget. "Ma'am, with respect," Commander Brennan said carefully, "single operator missions against fortified positions carry extreme risk. If something goes wrong... If something goes wrong, only one person dies instead of 5, Victoria interrupted. "Commander, I've spent 18 years living with the guilt of leading my teammates into a situation that killed them. I won't make that mistake again." She stood up and walked to the window overlooking the training facility where her students were successfully completing the exercise she'd designed to test their ability to think beyond conventional procedures. "But there's something different this time," Victoria continued. 18 years ago, I was fighting to prove I was the best EOD specialist in the Navy. This time, I'm fighting to ensure those 24 trainees don't have to face the same enemies that killed my original team. Chief Riley consulted his mission timeline. "Ma'am, intelligence suggests the terrorists are planning to deploy their devices within 72 hours. If we're going to prevent the attacks... then we go tomorrow night," Victoria decided. "Single insertion, neutralize the threat, extract before they can trigger whatever defensive systems they've prepared." Captain Chun looked concerned. "Victoria, you'll be operating without backup in hostile territory. against enemies who've spent years preparing for exactly this scenario. The odds. Victoria smiled, feeling for the first time in 18 years the calm confidence that had made her legendary in EOD circles. Sarah, the odds were never in our favor. That's why they need specialists who understand that some missions are worth the risk. That evening, Victoria returned to her temporary quarters and opened the photograph of EOD Team 7 one final time. But instead of seeing the faces of teammates she'd failed to protect, she saw the legacy of knowledge and experience they'd died to preserve. Diana Martinez, who'd taught her that courage meant protecting others even when you were afraid. Robert. Kim, who'd shown her that technical expertise was worthless without tactical wisdom. Sarah Thompson and Mike Foster, who demonstrated that teamwork meant being willing to die for people who shared your commitment to something greater than personal survival. Tomorrow night, she would return to the place where they died. But this time, she wouldn't be Viper, the legend trying to prove herself. She would be Victoria Lawson, the teacher who'd spent 6 months ensuring that the next generation of EOD specialists understood the difference between heroism and survival. Her phone buzzed with a final message from Tidewater Engine Works. It was a group text from her former coworkers. "Kick-ass Viper, your toolbox will be waiting when you get back." Victoria smiled, knowing that whether or not she survived the mission, she'd already accomplished what mattered most. The knowledge that had died with EOD Team 7 was now carried by 24 specialists who understood that the best way to honor fallen teammates was to ensure their sacrifice saved future lives. The quiet mechanic who'd hidden at Tidewater Engine Works for 18 years was gone forever. In her place stood someone who'd learned that legends weren't created by individual heroics, but by the willingness to pass on hard-won wisdom to people brave enough to carry it forward. Tomorrow, Viper would face the enemies who'd killed her teammates. But tonight, she was Victoria Lawson, teacher and guardian of knowledge that would outlive any single mission or operator. Some secrets were worth keeping. Some legends were safer in the shadows. But some fights were worth stepping back into the light. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.